Today I want to do a deep dive into affirmations. I want to answer all the questions you could possibly have about affirming, what affirmations are they a technique, what are the different kinds of ways that you can use affirmations, when are they necessary, when are they useful, how can you make them most useful and effective for you. Let's cover it all today. Before we get into it, I want to kind of give you an overview of my thoughts on affirmations, how I personally use them, and how I see affirmations. Because to me, there are kind of levels to affirming. And most of the time, the level of affirming you're at will coincide with where you are on your spiritual journey. We're gonna dive into it. I've extensively combed through Neville's work, especially, to get some of the references for the things I'm gonna talk about today, because I have seen some people make some interesting arguments as to what Neville implied in his teachings when speaking about affirmations, repetition, things of that nature. I want to give my interpretation of it today. I'm going to lay it all out for you. And of course, as always, the choice is yours. But having said that, I want you to have all the information that you could possibly have. I want you to be fully equipped to make your choices, know why you're doing what you're doing, and so you know all of the options that are available to you. I think that this list is pretty extensive, that we're going to cover a lot of territory, but obviously there are endless methods and techniques that you could use, different ways that you could use affirmations, and ultimately the best way to use affirmations is the way that they feel good to you and the way that they're most effective for you. So let's begin with my experience with affirmations. I think that maybe I've been lumped into, or I have a conception of myself and the community at large as being kind of split. Obviously, there's more than two subsections, but for what I'm speaking about today, you could see kind of two groups or subsections of the manifestation community or the law of assumption community. And how I see it is there are people who are lumped into the deciders, just make a decision group. And then there are people who are locked into the affirm, persist way of seeing and doing things. Personally, I wouldn't put myself in either group. I think I'm very fluid in that way, but I could see how people would lump me into the just make a decision group. And maybe with the way that I've talked about affirmations in the past, you would think I'm against affirming, which doesn't make any sense because affirmations are thoughts. We're thinking thoughts all day. We'll get into that whole conversation in a little bit. But to that end, I don't hate affirming, and I don't think that you should not affirm. As a matter of fact, I affirm all the time. But for me, my affirmations aren't something that I pre-plan. I have general affirmations, I guess what a lot of people would call self-concept affirmations, that I return to, that ground me, that feel good when they come up, just when I think the thought and I kind of choose to focus some energy into that thought. But most of the time, I will just start thinking about something that I prefer, think about something that I want to create, think about something that would be nice to have or to do or to be or to experience. And then instead of thinking that I have to say a certain sentence or use a certain wording in order for it to be a good affirmation or for me to constitute it as doing a technique, I'll take that thought, I'll take that idea, and then it'll usually turn into like an affirmation rampage. I say rampage because that's what a lot of people know it as, but it's not always, It's not always so hyped up. It's not always vigorously affirming and like being really energetic about it or really loud about it or having like some demanding tone to the affirmations. It's just like I'm just letting whatever wants to come to mind and whatever feels good flow, and then I take that thought and find the next best feeling thought and then string it along to meet this thought and then string it along to meet this thought until I'm just going down a stream of consciousness that feels good and that feels in alignment with what I want to see created in my reality. That's how I see affirming. It's not something where like I have a list and then in order to manifest this thing, I need to be saying this thing on this list. It's more of like what feels good, what's a good thought, what thought feels better than the thought that I was thinking that didn't make me feel so good. Let's hone in on that thought and see what kind of thoughts can spring forth from focusing on that energy rather than a thought that's less in alignment. This has just become my personal preference over time. It will likely continue to evolve. Having said that, it doesn't mean that you have to do exactly what I do or you have to do things in the way that I do them or else that things are not gonna work for you. Things are gonna work for you when you decide that that's how things work for you. But right now, the most effortless form of affirming for me is just maintaining my mental diet, just making sure that the thoughts that I'm thinking feel good and are in alignment with what I would prefer to see. And when I'm having thoughts that are not in alignment, rather than flipping the thought or having a thought interjection, other than those general affirmations, I will just look at the thought, determine whether or not it's something that I feel is true, something that I feel serves me or will benefit me and what I'm creating in my life. And If it isn't, then I'll find the thought that's related to that, but the opposite. And then I'll take that thought and let that lead to the next thought and let that lead to the next thought and just see where it goes until I feel some kind of emotional difference. I feel some kind of difference in my feeling state. That's what works for me currently at this moment. So having said that, let's talk about the affirmations are just thoughts, so affirming isn't a technique thing. Affirming is a technique, and I will explain to you why. Think about it like this. All affirmations are thoughts, that's correct, but not all thoughts are affirmations. Let's look up the definition of the word affirmation. You know, why not just go by the book? Affirmation definition. Okay, the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 5th edition says, affirmation is a noun, the act of affirming or the state of being affirmed, assertion, something declared to be true, a positive statement or judgment, the assertion that the testimony one gives is true and equivalent to that which would be given while under oath. So the second one for me is the most relevant. Something declared to be true, a positive statement or judgment. So, have you ever had a thought that's not true? Have you ever had a thought that was out of alignment? Have you ever had a thought about something and you really thought that that thing was a real thing, and then maybe a week later that thing's completely no longer relevant and now you think something completely the opposite? So an affirmation is a statement of truth. If you are thinking thoughts that are out of alignment, if you're thinking thoughts that don't feel good, that's not an affirmation. It's not an affirmation unless you believe into it, unless you determine that it's real, that it's true, that it's relevant to you, unless you're identifying with a thought in some way, shape, form, or fashion, whether it's positive or negative. Unless you identify it and see it as true, it's not an affirmation. Or if you are saying a statement, a positive statement, with the intention of it becoming true, that's an affirmation. So if you perceive it to be true right now, or if your intention is for it to be true, that's an affirmation. Now, if you just have a random passing thought, like, what if I woke up and my hair was purple? First of all, that's a question. But second of all, that's not an affirmation, but it is a thought. So not all thoughts are affirmations. Not all thoughts have to be true statements, but all affirmations are thoughts. So to say that everybody that is thinking is affirming is in a way true and false, because if you're thinking thoughts unconsciously and believing into thoughts unconsciously, and therefore manifesting your reality unconsciously, then in a way you were affirming, and what you were saying you perceived to be the truth, but you weren't necessarily doing a technique. So it's interesting. It's not just as simple as affirmations are just thoughts. It's not a technique, they're just thoughts. It's like, yes, all affirmations are thoughts, but not all thoughts have to be affirmations. And the way that this explanation that I'm giving you now can be useful for you and not just an argument for argument's sake is when you're having a negative thought. When you have a thought that feels out of alignment, doesn't feel good, doesn't resonate with you, doesn't feel like something that you want to create for yourself, if it does not feel good, then that thought is not true. So you don't have to fear your thoughts and think that if I had a negative thought, or if I have a thought that I think will not serve me, I have to be afraid of it, I have to affirm over it, I have to flip the thought, I have to be scared of the thought, I have to fight the thought, I have to make the thought go away. Because if you automatically recognize the non-reality of the thought, that the thought is not true, then it wasn't an affirmation. You just made a recognition. You just put yourself back into alignment by seeing the thought for what it is, something that you were picking up on energetically because you were in vibrational alignment with that thought. You were in a state that you became susceptible to having a thought like that, but you can shift your state anytime. You can shift your reality anytime. You can shift your truth anytime. So if you are aware enough to recognize the thought and say, that thought doesn't feel like me, doesn't feel good, doesn't feel like truth, then you can switch back into actually affirming the thoughts that you believe to be true or that you want to be true for yourself, that you want to identify with. That's what we would call an affirmation. So I only explain it this way to hone in on the fact that your thoughts should not be feared, and you don't have to think that every thought you think is automatically an affirmation and is automatically going to manifest. There's also no right or wrong way to affirm unless you've created those rules for yourself. One of these methods may work perfectly for one person, they might get amazing results, and another person tries the exact same thing and they see no positive benefit in their life. It is personal preference, which is the most important thing, personal preference, and finding what feels good to you, not just copying somebody or mimicking somebody because they got a certain result and you want the same result, but tuning into what actually feels good, what is actually helpful for you, and what actually is maintainable, and beneficial for you. Some people want to cut out all the time in the world to affirm all the time, and that works really well for them. Some people don't want to focus on their desire that much because it creates too much of an attachment. So they would prefer to just hone in on the thought, choose the belief that feels good to them, know that that's the truth, integrate that into their state and their identity, and move on with their life. And if it comes back into focus, if it reveals something deeper to be dug into or looked into, or there is still a perspective shift that needs to be made, then it will be made at that time. But it's not such an insistent focus on it in that way. There's a focus on maintaining a state of well-being, but there's not so much a focus on being insistent about the specific desire and affirming to that extent. Different strokes for different folks. So it's sincerely up to your personal preference. Things are going to feel good for different people and at different points in their lives, and for different subjects, for different desires. Just for different situations, you might feel a little bit different, or you might resonate with a different way of doing things, and that's totally fine. The most important thing, I think, is to find the thing that feels most natural to you, both the technique that you're using and the actual affirmation that you're saying. The more naturally you word it, and the more that the words that you're saying bring about a feeling of relief in you, a feeling of completion or satisfaction with what you're saying, the more that you can actually resonate and see the truth in the words that you're saying. And it's not such a combative energy of like, I'm forcing myself to believe this, or I'm saying this affirmation in order to convince myself that I need to believe this. The easier it's going to be for you to, one, want to say it, and two, for it to actually manifest. Because the more natural the affirmation sounds and feels to you, the closer you are in your state to the truth of that affirmation. Does that make sense? The worse that you feel about the affirmation that you're saying, or the thoughts that you're having in general, indicates where your state is in relationship to your actual desire. Here, we definitely promote the effortless approach, the path of least resistance, what feels best for you. So there are some affirmation techniques that are seemingly more effort objectively, and some that are seemingly less effort. But some people actually find security in the effort. Some people actually need that level of self-responsibility, level of checking in with themselves, making sure that they're thinking in alignment, and setting timers, and making a list, and having certain times to do certain things, or certain places that trigger an affirmation rampage, or you're doing this thing at this time, and that's how your technique regimen works for you. Some people get security from that. It helps them maintain their focus. It keeps their thoughts in alignment. It helps them not focus on the reality of the external and more on their internal reality, and that is their choice. I won't say that it's necessarily good or bad, because if it feels good to you, then it's great for you. But I am saying that it's definitely not necessary to force yourself to affirm or to do any sort of technique if it doesn't feel in alignment, if it doesn't feel good, if you don't actually want to do it. It should never feel like an obligation. It should never feel like something you're forcing yourself to do, or you feel like there's some negative implication to you not doing a certain thing. If that is the feeling that you're having, you should probably be doing the opposite of whatever you think you're supposed to be forcing yourself to do. So let's return to, yes, affirmations are thoughts. Affirmations are, of course, thoughts. You have to think to affirm. You could have different arguments about what constitutes thinking, and do you even need language to think? Because babies think, right, before they know how to speak, how to talk, what things are, or have any semblance of awareness of what's actually going on in physical reality. So obviously, in some way, shape, or form, you have to have a thought to affirm. And like I said, even telling the old story is an unconscious affirmation if you are still believing into the truth of that thing. If it still resonates with you, if you're still identifying with it in a way, you are affirming. It doesn't matter whether you think it's serving you or not. If you're buying into the reality of that thing and you're thinking that thought, then that thought is an affirmation because you believe it to be true. That's the defining factor of whether a thought is an affirmation or not. Do you believe it to be true? Yes or no? If it's true, it's an affirmation. If it's not true, it's just a thought. But there definitely is a difference between your newly programmed thinking, your intentional, conscious placing of thoughts and ideas, and reprogramming your mind to think in a certain way, or training yourself to think in a certain way. That is an intentional act. So thoughts that you plan in advance, or a conscious intention to think in a certain way, would be using affirmations as a technique. If it feels like you're like, what do I do with these thoughts, these negative thoughts, these intrusive thoughts, these combative thoughts, these thoughts that don't allow me to stay in alignment, how do I get these thoughts to go away? What do I do to get rid of these thoughts? You change your state of being. You change your perspective. You change your outlook on life, on your own creative power and on the meaning that you place on those thoughts. All affirmations are thoughts, but not all thoughts are affirmations. So if you have a thought and it doesn't feel good, decide that it's not true. And then decide, what is the thought that feels more true, or what is the thought that feels at least a little bit better than the thought I was thinking before. There's your affirmation, and then you can build off of that. That's a perfect place to start. There's nothing wrong with that. We talk about how your dominant thoughts create your reality, your dominant state of being. We always talk about dominance, but understand that dominance can be thought about in a few different ways, and that's why people use affirmations in different ways, and they all work. You can get results with all of them, and you could also try them and decide that that thing doesn't work or that you're not getting results. It is a matter of perspective, but this could really help clarify why some things work for some people and not for others. Dominance could be the amount of thoughts that you're thinking. If you're choosing to override the old thoughts through repetition, you're just going to continue to repeat the new thought, repeat it over and over again until you kind of override the old programming. That could work out for you very well, or it could maybe turn out to not be the most beneficial for you. We'll get into that later. But repetition does work. I mean, repetition is king of a lot of things. If you want to get good at something, you need to practice. You need to repeat over and over again, unless you have a natural inclination for that thing, which in that case, you probably wouldn't be worried about needing to repeat something or even thinking into it that hard. It'd just be something that you do, something that you be, something that's obvious. Otherwise, here you are repeating over and over again, practicing in order to implement this thing or make this thing natural and normal, or advance your ability to be able to do a certain thing or see things a certain way, or whatever it is. Repetition is very helpful for that. The more that you repeat it, eventually your subconscious mind is going to become more malleable and more accepting of the idea, because it's hearing the same thing constantly. In a way, you're brainwashing yourself. Instead of subconsciously automatically thinking that this situation means this and that, or this is going to happen because this happened, or this means this thing about me, you're building a new neural pathway. You're making a different connection so that your subconscious mind will automatically correlate you with the thing that you desire, so that you will feel in resonance with that thing, so that that thing will become natural. It will become your state of being. You will identify with it, and that thing will be allowed to exist and manifest for you in your reality. It also increases your focused attention. If you find it hard to focus and your brain is just in a million different places, and maybe sitting down to meditate does not feel like a beneficial or fun or good experience for you at all at this time, and you just want to focus on getting what you want, but you still have a lot of mental chatter and different things that are not necessarily in alignment or not necessarily conducive to what you're trying to create, you're probably going to be one of the people who just overrides the system with the brainwashing, with the constant repetition, with the making that thought feel more natural through exposure to the thought. So the dominance comes from dominant exposure to a certain thought, a certain affirmation, a certain reality or truth that you want to be true for yourself. This can become tricky in a few ways. If you're not wording your affirmation appropriately for you, for your situation, and covering your bases, you could be affirming to manifest the thing and the thing manifests, but you still don't feel like the person who's identified with the thing, who's capable of having it, who feels worthy of having it, who knows that it's safe to have that experience and that it's actually beneficial for you and not scary. If your nervous system isn't ready for it, if you're mentally not ready for it, if there's still some kind of incoherence in your mental, physical, spiritual, emotional body, all connected in your beingness, if there's still some level of incoherence in that, it could backfire. I don't say that to scare you. I say it as a precaution, and just so that you don't do it, so that you cover all your bases, and then affirm, repeat as much as you want, and you will get good results, because you will not be doing it from, I need to get that thing or become that thing, or that thing is out there. You will do it from the power and the conviction of knowing that I am the one who's creating this situation. I'm the one who's taking responsibility for changing the way that I think. And I know by doing that, I can have this thing because having this thing is my choice. But if you're affirming and your affirmation isn't focusing on you being the person already having it, and affirming actually turns your focus more to the lack of having the thing, that's why it can sometimes not yield you the results that you thought it would. Because you have to, again, go back to, how does this affirmation make me feel? Does it bring about a sense of relief? Does it actually feel like truth? Do I actually feel in resonance with this thought? Does it feel good? Does it sound natural? Does it sound like something I actually want to experience? Is this my real desire? And from that standpoint, and actually doing things based on how you feel and things that are in your own alignment and your own resonance, then you shouldn't have any issues. This can also be the pitfall with flipping thoughts, because it goes back to the not recognizing that if you deem the thought not to be true, then the thought is really irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't need to be delved too deeply into unless it's bringing up some kind of visceral emotional reaction in you, or you're being constantly triggered by a thought that you're having. Then you might need a little bit of deeper introspection. It might be something that you want to think about a little bit more extensively before you start to write the new story about it and before you start to integrate that. Because for some things there are layers, and some people need to go a little bit deeper than others. And for some people, spiritual bypassing is just not a thing. It just doesn't matter. And it doesn't have to be, because in the reality where you already have the things that you want, all of those things are already irrelevant. The things being the negative thoughts that you think you need to flip, or that you think have some kind of say over what's going to manifest. But when you understand that the only true affirmation is what you believe to be true and what's in alignment with you in your state of being, then there's really no need to forcefully or neurotically flip thoughts and be constantly repeating out of a fear that if I'm not repeating this specific thought, then this other thought is going to be allowed to manifest. Understand that you're more powerful than that. You don't have to look at that thought and be scared of it. You could just see the thought, be like, I don't think so, and go back to thinking what you want to think, or think about something else, or focus on something else, understanding that that thought is not some boogeyman in the closet. It can't really pop out and get you. That thought is you in a way. So if it's you, you can choose to express it, or you can choose to leave it in the realm of the unmanifested. And if you focus your attention elsewhere, then that's exactly what's going to happen. Your reality is going to take form based on where your focus is and based on resonance with your state of being. The second way that we can think about dominance of thoughts is the quality of your affirmations, the thoughts that you place the most meaning and importance behind. So if you resonate more deeply with your imagination, with your 4D world, with the realm of the unseen, rather than the 3D external reality, and you don't see that, or even the passing thoughts that don't feel true to who you are, if you focus more on the ones that do feel like you, the ones that do feel true, the ones you actually want to identify with and want to be expressed in your world, then the thoughts that you put the most meaning behind, the most importance behind, are going to be the dominant thoughts, because they mean more to you because they're actually true. So once you understand what thoughts actually are and what affirmations actually are, you can go more into the quality of the thought. If the thought's not something that even is relevant to you, if you don't identify with it and recognize it as a part of yourself or as a part of the story that you're telling, then the thought doesn't really matter. So no matter how many of these random erroneous thoughts that you have, you don't have to place the importance on them that you place on the thought that you actually prefer. So even if I have 5 thoughts that are out of alignment, if I have one really good thought that feels really empowering, that I have a lot of conviction behind, that I put a lot of faith and importance behind, that I really put my belief into, this thought is going to be the more dominant one, even if I only thought this thought one time and I had 5 other thoughts that were out of alignment. If I believe more into this thought than I did into these thoughts, then these thoughts don't even matter. It's having a strong conviction in your affirmation, a strong level of knowingness of the truth of yourself, knowing that I'm the only one who can decide the truth. There's no other cause outside of me. So why would I subject myself to thinking that, oh, these thoughts are not actually me, they're just creating my reality and I'm subjected to whatever these random thoughts say, rather than being the one choosing your thoughts and focusing your lens on seeing the film or seeing the movie or seeing the script that you actually want to see. That completely eliminates conditions, contradictions, unwanted thoughts, because they hold no level of importance to you. It's pretty much as simple as that. The thoughts that feel good to you are the ones that you're going to deem as more important or more valuable, of higher quality, and the ones that don't feel so good, that you don't want to claim as true or claim as you, then you kind of just let them float on by, float down the lazy river of your consciousness, and find the next person who's in a state where they're more susceptible to hosting that thought and allowing that thought to penetrate and harvest in their life. But that person's not going to be you. Therefore, that thought doesn't really mean that much to you. Might mean a lot to another person who still identifies with it and sees it as true, sees that this might be real for me, this is scary, this means something about me that I don't actually prefer, but that's not you, because you are more focused on the quality of your thoughts. The contents of your thought is more important to you, and the resonance with the thought is more important to you than the actual amount of thoughts that you have. So when you're focusing more on the quality of your thoughts rather than the quantity of your thoughts, not saying either one is necessarily good or bad, I'm just saying that they're different and they might give you different results depending on where you are. If you're so insistent on seeing yourself a certain way, of being locked into a certain story, then you probably are going to need a lot of positive affirmations in order to pull yourself out of that state, in order to refocus yourself and be able to see things differently, because you don't have a lot of conviction, because maybe you waver a lot, because maybe you feel like it's very hard to maintain alignment or stay in the state of the wish fulfilled. But when you give the old story thoughts less importance than the new story thoughts, you understand that you can kind of just starve the old story out. The thoughts don't really mean anything if you don't give them any importance. The thoughts are just thoughts. There's no need to fight with them. You just focus on the thoughts that you want. So instead of continuously repeating, I am this thing, I am this thing, I am this thing, from the energy of I want this thing, I want this thing, I'm lacking this thing, or I'm trying to be this thing, you affirm with a lot of conviction. You make a firm decision from the state of I already am that thing now. I already have that thing now. I see that reality is true and real for myself now. So it's the difference between chasing thoughts in or out, chasing thoughts and trying to find a thought that feels good because you are so far out of alignment, it feels so out of reach, or chasing thoughts out like, oh, these are bad, go away. Like, how dare you come into my sacred mental space? And then you're sitting there fighting with the thought when you could have just been having the better feeling thought. It's that versus just recognizing that you are the creator of your reality and therefore the creator of all of the thoughts, and that the thoughts are just there and open and available for you to choose from. They're more like suggestions. They're suggestions until you pick them up, until you identify with them, until you choose them. So be selective in your identification with the thoughts and just remain faithful to seeing things differently than they were in the past. Not seeing things based off current circumstances, but seeing things based off of, how does this thought feel? Does it feel like truth? Does it feel good? Whether or not you're having any 3D evidence of that actually being real or being truth. You don't go off of the 3D evidence, you go off of how it feels to you. Okay, we might have to do part 1 and part 2. I'm thinking maybe we'll do part 1 and part 2. Oh, a series? Okay, so we'll do part 1, just an overview of affirmations. What are affirmations? What are thoughts even? And what are the different approaches to affirming in general, or using the thought structure, your mental capacity in general. And then in the next part, part 2, we'll talk about all the different techniques. We're going to talk about mental diet, robotic affirming, general affirmations, specific affirmations, wording your affirmations, affirmation tapes, subliminals, everything. Because I still have so much to get through. Oh my God. Yeah. So this will be part 1. In part 2, we'll talk about all the different methods of autosuggestion, what Neville had to say about robotic affirming, what I think now about robotic affirming, because my perspective has kind of changed. And I'll talk more about my preferred method of affirming and how to make any method that you choose, any technique that you choose, how to make it actually work for you. So that's gonna do it for me today. I intend this message serves you well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments. If you'd like to work with me or check out any of my other platforms, all the information for that will be in the description box below. And other than that, I love you all so much. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.